So today, we are here to talk about branding. We're here with a number of different tree frogs, and we're going to go through, like I said a few minutes ago, a whole bunch of incredibly fascinating material around branding. And hopefully at the end of this, everybody has some great context as to what they could do to improve their brand and get noticed as a business. So today we actually have 4 people, but there's 3 people here. We've got Troy, who's our specialist in organizational growth. So if you have marketing questions or branding questions after this, you could reach out to Troy. We have Taylor, who's running our webinars for us. Thank you, Taylor. And myself, who is just, I can't stop talking. And when I'm handed a microphone, I don't let anybody else have it. So that's why I'm here. And lastly, we have Jamie, who's actually our enterprise growth specialist. So we have some great talent here. If you are looking to ask a specific question to somebody, feel free to ask them through the Zoom webinar chat, and I'm sure they'll answer you. Now, I like to start every webinar with the same idea, and that's this guy, Lev, or Charles Vygotsky, as I know him. And this is a man who died young, and nobody in North America really knows him well. We tend to think of Jung and others as the center or the core of psychologists, psychotherapy, etc. But Vygotsky was actually probably the most important person in my mind in cognitive psychology and learning in particular. And what he did is he sort of came up with a number of frameworks, and my favorite framework that he came up with was, especially as it relates to education, was that people on their own, if you go out to try and do branding on your own without any framework, without any thought process, then you're going to really struggle to get the pieces right, really struggle to get there. So what happens is you need to find mentors, you need to find places, you need to find people that understand how it is that you get from here to there, and you use those people to mentor you and help you to help create that framework for you so that you can grow in and figure out that stuff. And unless you happen to be a genius, which if you are a genius, you don't need to watch this webinar. This is for non-geniuses only. Then you kind of figure it out all on your own. The rest of us actually have to learn by having other people give us a gentle nudge in the right direction. And so that framework, that concept of we're going to help you guys get into the right mindset, give you the right information, create the right framework so you can move forward, that's always how I like to start. So mentally, I'm saying this stuff should help you. I'm also very proud that this branding webinar and the things that TreeFrog does, I like to just always talk about this. There's been some statistical analysis done in the last year that has shown that cities and towns that have a business like TreeFrog, where we actually help the local area, the local community grow in terms of helping their brand, helping their technology, getting them online, helping with digital marketing, etc., genuinely helps the local community to a visible factor. I'm very proud of that because that gives us meaning at TreeFrog, that we are genuinely helping businesses in the local area grow. And it's not just through paid services, though obviously we do paid services. It's also just genuinely helping people with ideas and frameworks like what we're offering right now today. Now let's talk about brand. And this is actually the first webinar we're giving in this series. And it's the beginning of helping a business grow. If you don't have this in place, a strong brand, you're going to struggle throughout the rest of your business growth. And really, having a strong brand is about memory, it's about connection, it's about the emotional connection that people have with the experience with your organization. Whether you have a not-for-profit or whether you have a large business, it doesn't really matter. What branding is about, helping people feel what it is that your business does. Getting noticed, essentially. At the bottom of this, though, is that people trust other people that are credible. So ultimately, trust comes from credibility. Trust is at the bottom of everything. People absorb information from people they know, like, and trust. And as a result, people do business with, they give money to, they interact with, and they want to have more interactions with people they know, like, and trust. And that's at the basis of what branding is. At the basis, what we're trying to do is a series of repeated positive events that happen with people, and every single time they have a positive event, positive interaction with the organization, we need to connect that with a memory so that they can remember what that's like in the future. And by doing that, it reduces their risk so that they know the next time that they're going to have an interaction of some sort, they're going to have less risk because they know they kind of know what to expect. they have this emotional connection with what's going to happen next, and thus they can go concentrate on other things. And ultimately, as a human being, most of the back of our head, almost all of what it's trying to do at any given moment, is trying to reduce risk constantly. In fact, we've grown several different brains. Not going to talk about that today, but at the base of the whole thing is a reptilian brain, and it's just constantly trying to figure out how to reduce risk. And brand is trying to communicate with that brain, trying to figure out how can we make people trust more. Inside that brain are our values, the things that we are most likely to lean towards. And in fact, we buy on our values. You've probably heard this before, that people buy their values. And the fact is, why does Troy buy Under Armour and I buy Joe Boxer? Because at some level underneath something, there's been an emotional connection. There's been a thing that's made us go, we like this product, we trust this product, and we're going to continue to trust this product in the future. Now, I want to talk about this very quickly. So there is a lot of people out there. There are a lot of people out there who buy bottled water on a regular basis. Now, this is kind of criminal. So you can get water out of the tap and drink it, all the water you need for basically the month, for about 15 cents. Or you can ruin the environment, cause all sorts of environmental damage, as well as other things. And the simple fact is, tap water, there are people who believe that they can taste the difference between waters, and or one water versus another water versus another water. And what's interesting here is Dasani as an example. It actually, for the liquid price of a Dasani water, you can actually go into the ground miles deep with a giant drilling rig, maybe even under the ocean, pull a whole bunch of black sludgy stuff out, run it through some giant machines over the course of many days, stick it in a truck, drive it somewhere, and have it come out of a little nozzle at a gas station. And that's still cheaper than bottled water by the gallon. Like that, is that not mental? I mean, and I think this is funny because there's now scientific evidence that shows that actually nobody can tell the difference. I mean, there's a few people that can tell the difference, but it's something like 87% of human beings can't tell the difference between two waters. And yet, $113 billion was spent on bottled water last year, which is actually more than the GDP of the 100 smallest countries in the world. I just think it's absolutely criminal that someone would ever drink that stuff.
I love it. Love it.
The reality is, we buy based on that emotional connection. Right? We buy based on that feeling that we have, that we liked this water. We probably had a positive experience. Maybe we were in Hawaii, maybe we were at the cottage, but something happened and we drank that water, and we don't remember what the actual moment was, but we connect ourselves with that thing. And that positive experience you had, it doesn't even need to be the water inside. It's the experience, it's the trust that I now have for that bottle for the rest of my life. And so next time I walk into 7-Eleven, I'm going to pick the water that I had the positive experience with in the past, because it reminds me in that way. And that is the power of brand. Ultimately, it's that what's at the bottom of that. There's a question here. So my husband buys Arrowhead Lime carbonated water because he likes the taste. Yeah, so again, the reality is, there are obviously some taps that taste badly, and there are also mechanisms that you could buy inexpensively to remove the chlorine, to remove the things, and not have to buy bottled water and ruin the environment. But there is a brand connection with that makes a lot of sense. And that brand, so gives us identity. It makes us different than other people, other things. It makes us memorable. So when we go in to pick water, we're not just picking a random bottle of water. We're picking the water that represents us, that we have had a positive experience with. In fact, even all of our team can get behind that. All of everybody that involved in our business from every angle will get connected with that idea of brand. And this is the thing, is that if you walk into 7-Eleven and all the waters are the same, if you walk into the store and all the underwear aisles have the same product, then you're not going to be successful as a company selling water or selling underwear, because you don't stand out, and thus you get washed off the plate and there's nobody interested in buying your product. What's interesting is the emotional connection doesn't even have to be positive. The emotional connection can be terrible. And sometimes it's just the memory or the expectation that I'm going to have a consistent experience that drives brand. So in fact, I may know that if you buy a Ferrari is going to not work most of the time. I still want to buy the Ferrari because of other reasons, because of my values, because of what's behind everything. In fact, there's multiple examples. Here's a couple of actual brands who literally are proud of the fact that they're going to kill you. I mean, and that's what they're selling. Like that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But they're doing very well. 17 locations across North America. The other thing is that people often connect the idea of brand with symbols. And I'm going to get into this a lot, but your brand is not your symbol. Your symbol is a function, it's a mechanism of reminder to help people out with their brand, but it is not the brand itself. And in fact, most people try to come up with a logo with and the process of creating a logo, what they're actually doing is trying to go through a brand process, the most expensive way possible. It's kind of like calling a lawyer and trying to figure out what you should name your child, right? You spend hours and hours and hours and hours with the lawyer trying to figure out what you should name your child. Don't do that. Don't hire a designer to figure out your brand. Hire a branding organization to figure out your brand, and then call your lawyer and tell your lawyer what your child is going to be, and then they'll drop the paperwork, etc. So the reality is, it's a much more complex process. It's not just the symbol, it's all the things underneath that, the collateral, the way we communicate. It's the background on Zoom, it's the hair color that we choose. It's all the other pieces that fit together. And the way other people talk about us even is part of that brand. What creates the emotional connections is what creates brand. In fact, things as simple as a hat can create a brand, an idea, a symbol, a concept. Why someone would wear a specific kind of hat, like a Bobby's hat, it's still a thing. It was originally around so that people could stand on it to climb fences. That is no longer a reason to wear a Bobby hat, and yet people still do that because it's a symbol, and they wear their symbol on their shoulder. Say a red hat, maybe red cap, says something on it. That's also a symbol. You know, and anything can be a symbol. We actually at Tree Frog have a smell, and we spent months figuring out what the smell of Tree Frog is. I'd be fascinated. You know what? I'll give a prize to anybody, not a Tree Frog, but anybody else who can guess what the smell of Tree Frog, the brand of the smell of Tree Frog is by the end of this presentation. So somebody remind me to come back to that, and we'll give everybody a little bit, see if they can find it. Anyway, so another thing you can have is a brand. So see if, just in a couple of quick notes, can you tell what this is? Everybody get that? Everybody see that that's sort of a memorable sound. Everybody just for a couple of notes, and there's lots of examples of that in the world that can figure out what exactly, see? Jaws, exactly. Everybody gets that sound has an emotional connection with me. And there's so many sounds out there, there's so many smells, so many things that connect me back with whatever it is, that taste, that memory, etc. So there's a question here for as an organization. How does that brand, how's it going to affect culture? How's it going to affect our future sales? How's it going to affect who's going to come work with me? How's it going to affect the ability to sell my company? Like, brand has so many other impacts. At the end of the day, it comes back to people buying those values. So the question is, how do we figure out first what our brand character is? What is the definition of us? Not, can we make a logo? Can we create a symbol? We'll get into that. What is the thing that we want people to remember about us, that we are going to be consistent every single time? Now, what's interesting is, if I am consistent, like I said earlier, it doesn't really matter if the experience is terrible. As long as it's consistent, people will remember. So that intentionality, being extraordinarily intentional about how it is and what it is that my organization is about, and then making sure everything is about that, that is ultimately what leads to branding. So how do you come up with that brand character? Here's some sort of examples of how you can sort of turn the cube and look at it from different angles and try and get a sense of what my brand is, what my character is. So here's an example. If I was a person, how old, if I was Google, would I be? Anybody want to throw in in the webinar chat? How old do you think a Google person is? And how old do you think an Apple person is? And how old do you think an IBM person is? What do you guys think? Frogs, how old is an IBMer? If IBM was a person, how old would they be?
I'm going to say late 40s, early 50s.
Late 40s, early 50s? Good guy. And how old is somebody who works at Google?
Early 20s.
Right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting here is, Google, you still have this idea that there's a couple of guys in the basement, probably in sneakers and some tattered, unwashed jeans, doing all the Google stuff, right? Yeah, that hasn't happened for a very, very long time. And in fact, if you go look at the owners of Google, you'll note they're not only are they old, but they were never in a basement in tattered jeans. Like that was their PhDs. They're brilliant, brilliant fellows. But that's the idea, the concept of how old my brand is. So another interesting concept is what shape is my brand. So this is another way of turning it and looking at it. So and this is sort of is similar to age, but what they say is, so people who are traditionalists, who have strong, rigid hierarchies, they're a triangle brand. IBM would be a triangle brand. Someone who has 4 people sitting at a table, so they call it Gen X brand or a square brand. So this is where everybody has their place and everybody knows their place. This is more of sort of an Apple-y type brand. And lastly, we have a circular brand where everybody's equal, everybody's at the table. And this would be an example of, back to the same examples, it would be an example of Google. And so depending on how people interoperate at the company might impact the shape. So what is that character? How can we get to the bottom of that? Now, here's another interesting one. And 90% of people know what the CEO or the boss of the company, what they drive. I think this is fascinating. So the owner of Walmart, massive organization, drove an old F-150 until he couldn't drive anymore. And the owner of Southwest Airlines, the guy who founded it, he bought himself a busted old used Porsche, like 20-year-old Porsche. Not like a classic old Porsche, just like a busted Porsche. Jeff Bezos is known for being dropped off at his business every day. He's a billionaire by his wife in his busted ass 1996 Honda Accord. Now, this has nothing to do with wealth or status. This has to do with brand. This has to do with the message that he's trying to give. And in fact, he was very clear about this. Jeff Bezos said, I'm doing this because money and effort should be put into the customer experience and growth, not into my car. I think what's most fascinating is that, in fact, Jeff Bezos owns a whole bunch of cars. He has a Ferrari Pininfarina, I don't know how to pronounce that, it's so expensive. Bugatti Veyron, I know that one. He has even a couple of jets, and yet he gets dropped off in the morning in his Honda Accord. He probably doesn't, I gotta say. This is just part of the brand story, part of the idea that Amazon's not gonna spend money frivolously. So what is that? It's that brand idea. If your company, if your organization, if what you're trying to create or who you are was a vehicle, if the CEO was driving that vehicle, what would it be? Is it that you're trying to portray success, that you're trying to portray status? I had a close CEO to me that showed up to a meeting and his buddy said to him, dude, you need to leave this meeting with the watch you're wearing. You're embarrassing me and everybody around it. Now, I happen to be in the fashion industry. I don't even wear a watch. I'm not sure what sign that is. But the idea is, if you are something, what would you be? If you were a person, how old would you be? If you were a car, what car would you be, etc. If you were a sport, what sport would you be? There's a famous speaker in the local area of Toronto, and he's sort of come up with this concept that, in fact, sports and the way sports are also a way of being, are part of your brand. So you can be rigidly hierarchical, compliant, systematic, and that's sort of like that compliance, that organized way. In the football, I don't know much about sports, so I don't know what I'm talking about this. This should be a Troy thing or a Jamie thing, maybe even Taylor, for goodness sake. I'm the lowest part of this totem pole. But
Definitely don't know anything about sports.
you don't either? Okay, well then, so the idea is in football, it's you write the plays ahead of time, you teach everybody the plays, everybody goes out in the field and they run those plays, and if they fail those plays, they're off the team, and you get somebody else to replace them until somebody runs the proper play. In basketball, you kind of teach everybody the core plays, and I think this is the way hockey works as well, and then the basketball goes thrown in the air, and then everybody goes for it. And the coach is yelling from the side, look, go left, go right, or whatever it is, catch the ball, whatever, whatever happens. But the reality is there's engagement by the leadership during the process, and it's agile and it's spontaneous. And then you got baseball, where basically it works like this. Your leadership picks the baseball leaders and then sends them all out to do their thing, right? And after the sort of game starts, the leadership just sort of stands on the side like this. And the only thing that they can do is fire people, get off the field, right? So that's sort of, and they create as much competition and, whatever that is. And what's fascinating is each one of these brands, each one of these sort of concepts in how a business is, has different strengths, different weaknesses, but it is a thing. It's one or the other. It's consistent. That's important from a brand perspective. Another one of my favorite concepts, Martin Lindstrom, who's actually, he's already a friend of mine. I know him. I had dinner with him recently. He's a really nice guy. He came up with this idea that if you could look at this picture right now, you could probably tell me what it is. So there's two partial letters, two full letters, L and A, and yet it's unmistakable. Can we all agree that you could take a Coke bottle, smash it on the ground, take a very small piece, and always know what that is? That is a smashable brand. That is the ultimate manifestation of branding, where you could take any piece of your organization, any piece of what you are, and somebody could find it on the floor one day in 100 years from now and pick it up and look at it and go, okay, this is that. I mean, Coke is so good at branding that over the last 100 years, they sort of figured out. So 100 years ago, they came up with that bottle idea. Before that, it took them a while to sort of get into that. Once they figured it out, they have kept that consistent. Even in plastic bottles today, you still have that same aesthetic, right? I think that they did an even better job, Coke did, when they convinced the world that Santa Claus was Coke Red, not green. Now, as Tree Frog, I think we're going to work hard to turn that around and make Santa Claus green again. Santa Claus is supposed to be green. He started green. That's a much better color for a Santa Claus. Walking around in the forest, you want to be green. You don't want to be red. You're going to get shot. Anyway, that's a different story. That got to give kudos to Coke for that. There's also the idea in branding, and I'm going to come back to this a little bit later, which is failing the logo test. So if you can go to any one of your pieces, this is a smashable brand idea, take your logo off, your Symbology off your website or off your marketing materials, and it gets replaced by a logo of somebody else's, and you can't tell that that shouldn't be there, then you're not actually doing all the things that you need to do from a branding perspective. So isn't that an interesting idea? Now we get into sort of the next, I'm going to say, phase of this webinar, which is talking about what do we do? So we want to either build a brand, mature a brand, or rebrand. And I want to talk about sort of high level. It depends on where you are as an organization as to what you're going to do. If you're at the very beginning of your idea, then you're a single person with a single idea, and you could probably have a conversation with the designer and go through a thing to figure out what is it that makes you you, and then go figure out your brand from there. It's aspirational at that point. If, however, you're a business that's been around for a little bit, everybody has opinions about you. Our process is we got to go ask everybody, what's their opinion? What do you know about these guys? And then figure out from that, what are the things that make them them so that they can own, that they can be consistent about, whether they like it or not, and then run from there. And lastly, is if we're dealing with a really large organization, now you've got disparate groups. And, for example, we worked on the brand between Air Canada and Canadian Airlines when they came together. And getting everybody to sort of figure out what are the values that we have consistent, what makes sense, how does it all line up, and how we're going to make everybody believe and agree that this is who we are, this is how we're going to behave, this is our brand, this is how we're going to act and create emotional connection in the future. That is behind all of those pieces. So depending on where you are at the very beginning of your story, very beginning of your business, you might just need a quick symbol, a couple of symbols, some symbols that represent you, some colors, some smells, figure that stuff out for yourself. Later on, then you need some professionalization. You need to make sure that how you're coming across is professional, is clean, is meaningful. Then you need to figure out, you got to get everybody on the same page. You got to get stuff out there so everybody's using your brand and acting in the same way everywhere they do it. Then you've got to make sure you've registered those things. You've got it like locked up with some lawyers. And then as you start to build products, et cetera, they all have to fit into that larger piece and that larger concept. And this is why, depending on where you are as a business, will depend on what model, how we go through that. Now, this is where it comes in, that brand, all the key components, the key different pieces, all these emotional connections. This is actually, and Troy, we were talking about this yesterday, which is brand actually comes down to some core ideas. You want to take it from here? Oh, you're on mute still.
Sorry about that, guys. Thanks, Sean. Everybody knows when it comes to branding, it's who you are as a company. It's everything you stand for, kind of inside and out. But it's the elements of your company's culture and personality and the reason why, not just your design. It's your vision, your purpose. It's kind of the reason why you get up out of bed every day, and more along the lines of why people choose you as a business. So when it comes to this actual diagram, this is called the Golden Circle. And it was put together by a gentleman named Simon Sinek. He's a renowned business thought leader. He introduced this, which is a cool concept. I've been using this for quite some time with a lot of my own clients. But when it comes to companies and what people know about companies, everyone knows what you do. So we're talking to everyone who's in this webinar. Everybody out there knows what you do. If you have a website, if you have some social media, they probably know how you do it. So maybe that's your value proposition or your key differentiators, maybe your unique selling points. But there's very few companies that know why they do what they do. And it comes back to the point that Simon Sinek always says is people don't buy what you do, they actually buy why you do it. If you can think about that, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And just to give an example with Apple, Apple starts with the why. They say in everything we do, we believe in changing the status quo. We believe in thinking differently, and everybody knows that slogan. The how is we make products that are beautifully designed and user-friendly. And the what is, we just happen to make great computers, tablets, and cell phones. Want to buy one? So Sean, I want to put this over to you quickly. Thanks for letting me chime in. But when it comes to Tree Frog, everybody knows what we do. We're an award-winning company. We've been around 20 years. We're known for digital transformation. We do this by helping businesses through that natural cadence you were speaking of, through unified digital strategy, modernization, digitization, and disruptive innovation. But what's our why? Can you tell a webinar and talk more about our why?
About Tree Frog's why?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to keep rolling because we've got lots of stuff to cover today. But the core why to Tree Frog, why we exist, and we internally talk about this constantly, is we genuinely want to help other people be successful. And as we help other people be successful, we become successful ourselves. And that's been our trick over the last 20 years. It's our sort of secret sauce. Turns out, incidentally, that Coca-Cola's secret recipe is actually water. That's anyway. So, but our secret sauce is helping other people. So, Givers Gain, we've been helping people in all sorts of ways, and by helping people, our brand is about making sure other people are successful, and through helping other people be successful, we drive business towards ourselves. So let's talk about now brand. So that's the sort of why behind it. That's sort of really important, is all of those pieces, the why, the values, et cetera. You've got to figure out who you are. And this is, so step one is not your logo. Step one is, what are you? What makes you different? What makes you special? And ultimately, what you want to come out with is a description describing exactly what you are, what makes you different and special, and figure out what are the core, it can be 3, it can be 8, it can be 10 things that you will commit to doing, and everything that you do will be that way. Don't pick something that you can't be every day by default, right? I make the joke that we used to have as one of Tree Frog's core values was classy. It's not, because, I dress in a suit, Troy dresses in a suit. I think that's a good one, it's easy. But the reality is I also swear when I hit myself on the head with the hammer, and I realize that's just not classy. I can't own that every day, because so that can't be one of the core things. But I can tell you that I'm going to be innovative. And every single time I look at something, we can't as an organization not look at it and want to change it and make it better. And so that's something that we own. That's sort of a core, a why, what makes us different. And in fact, Tree Frog has a core set of values, the frogness, that we stick to all the time. Now, this figuring out of what is different, what makes us special, what's at the bottom of our brand, sort of, and writing this out. Who are we talking to? What's there? What's behind everything? That becomes, there's all sorts of different ways to do this. We have a process, we call it positioning statement, which is we'll figure out who's the core audience, what are we trying to do for them, what makes us special, what are the benefits that come out of that, et cetera. And that's how we go in that right direction. And then from that, we figure out with people we work with, what are the features, what are the things that make them special? Why do people care that would make them special? What's the emotion that they would get out of that? And then how are we going to help them believe that that's true about us? So that we're innovative, that Tree Frog is innovative. The function would be, hey, that we're helping people do things they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. That helps people grow, makes people happy, challenges people. And we can prove that because we've done that over and over and over and over again. And I can show that because of the testimonials, because, through videos, et cetera, that we do. So that's actually ultimately branding drives marketing. That's why it comes first when we're talking about building a business. Now that you've figured out and you sort of sat down and figured out this is exactly what we're going to do, and we go through that whole process with our clients, which is how do we position you to figure out what exactly do you own? Then you want to figure out who you're speaking to, and you want to unpack that. What I mean by that is there's all these people that you could potentially speak to, and then there's all these different ways that you could speak to them. There's not one giant lever that you pull and everybody comes and follows you and works with you. In fact, there's all these little tiny levers that you got to pull, and by pulling those in the right order, you ultimately get noticed. You get out there. The question is not what levers do I pull, because if I have infinite amount of energy, I'll just pull every lever all the time, press all the buttons all the time. If you have an insane personal energy and lots of people, you can just do that, press all the buttons all the time. Otherwise, you have to figure out where can I spend my money and my time best to get the best reaction from the people that are relevant to me. So what we do is we help people pull together what are those different groups. We call them personas. That's an industry standard term. You figure out where are they coming from, what questions they have, what are their interests, and you can actually define, on a piece of paper, what is that person gonna be like? This is the person that's gonna buy from me that I most want to work with, a profile. Once I can figure out what they sort of are gonna be like, then I can figure out what's the experience that they should have from the beginning to the end that makes sense. There's a lot of thought that has to go into this. How do they find us? What leads to consideration they're going to consider using us as an organization? Then, et cetera, all the way till I bought it, all the way to I had a successful experience, and now I'm going to want to come back and do it again in the future. So that journey mapping is really important. Then the next thing is we got to figure out if we know all those things, then how could we best, from our core values, from the people we want to speak to, how can we best show them through imagery, through colors, and through just design what it is that they convince them through that process? And that's called mood boarding. So we sit down and go, okay, let's pull all these pictures together, and you can do this at home. Another great way to do this is get a bunch of magazines, remember magazines, or use Pinterest, really useful tool for this, and just get all sort of pictures that represent your company, put them all in one place, and then figure out why is that? Then figure out what is that general color scheme, and you can say, well, this value leads towards this idea, and this therefore would be the best way for me to go to market. Now I've figured out values, I've figured out aesthetics, I've figured out my customer, my client. Now I can get into symbols. So now symbols, this is sort of really important. Obviously we know symbols, there's lots of symbols in the world that we'd recognize from thousands of years ago. Those symbols have become the concept of logos. And logo is really just a quick thing that I could put on anything that would help me sort of remind, can see the tree frog logo. We've got it on all sorts of different things, just to remind me that, yes, there's a good experience here and it connects me back with that central existence. So that logo is not the brand, that is the symbol that represents that emotion that I had. And a great logo, a spectacular logo in my mind, is so simplistic. It's actually, I was talking with Kasia, who's a super talented designer at Tree Frog. And she was saying yesterday, there's actually a couple of different levels of logo. The first is when you get all your ideas out and you've got this crazy thing and there's all this stuff. And then to make it better, you simplify, you simplify, you simplify until you reach a thing that is so simple that I could draw it in the sand with a stick. Or I could carve it out of a potato with a butter knife. Now that is a spectacular symbol because I can remember it easily and I can stick it on something. And now that sort of symbology and that icon, if it's so complex that I can't print it without spending $1,000 to do it, or it's going to be really difficult to do, then I've missed the point. If my smell is so overly complex that it disgusts me, then it's not a good smell to make your brand smell. That makes sense. And that takes a lot of energy, is sort of figuring out from all that complexity how the piece is going to fit together, what are we going to draw, and taking an old logo and making it a new one. And it's fascinating. We've done this so many times. I can tell all sorts of examples of this. What's even more interesting is when you try and take an old logo and move it forward. So that symbol actually changes. There are some symbols that haven't changed in a long time, but most symbols, most icons, most logos have a general growth to them. So in fact, if you think about Pepsi, there has been a natural cadence of every, say, 20 years, maybe 10 years, they go through a change and sort of represents the new version. And yet you go back to the original logo and still remember who they are. The same with McDonald's. You probably don't think about this, but in fact, the original logo to the logo today, radical change. Ford, same thing. Apple, same thing. UPS, that maturation, this is sort of an important part. Tree Frog, man, the first logo was an embarrassing thing. And I still see our logo elsewhere as per my posts in the last few days. Walmart, etc. So what's interesting is I want to give you an example of where we've helped work with an organization from the ground, taking an older brand and helping them find their new voice, their new brand. So an example is Mr. Transmission. So we worked with them, say 5 or 6 years ago on this. And the problem is that if you went to every Mr. Transmission in Canada, you'd notice that they're all, actually there's this sort of entropy where they all sort of got different over the course of many years. And as their logo changed, some people adopted it, some people didn't. And so you ended up with, there was this sort of natural growth to the logo, but it was basically a Stanley Cup on its side. That's what we sort of described it. It was intended to be a picture, the logo, a picture of a transmission, but a transmission hasn't looked like this in 50 years. I mean, that's not what a transmission looks like typically for most of the things that they do. So it's sort of lost, and we were trying to figure out, how do we work with this to move it forward? And in fact, part of that was making sure that there's some consistency to all of the things that they have out there and pulling everything together. And so this is a very successful business. And so what we did is we said, okay, well, we don't want to go stray too far away from what we're doing. We're going to just tweak it a little bit, clean it up a little bit, give a little bit of love so that we can, it can go in a meaningful direction. And ultimately we realized, they're not as much in transmissions, or not exclusively in transmissions anymore. Actually, a lot of what they do is sort of figure out what's wrong. It's technology stuff. It's updating firmware, updating things, fixing other things. Then we got rid of the Stanley Cup, which is no longer relevant, and cleaned other things up. And today, Mr. Transmission's logo is clean, modern, and tips its hat to its original form. And today you can see everything's gotten super consistent with what they do. And the same thing, we could go through all sorts of examples. Here's an accounting firm, same sort of general idea, where they started off, they start out sort of boring and old and something you'd sort of see from Staples, and we helped them come up with something that made them special, which is, how they got their numbers in order, how they worked with things, and we gave them the curb appeal in order to go grow, to go get visible, and actually ended up selling. In fact, that brand, those ideas, that stuff, once you've come up with the values, the aesthetics, the way you're going to look, now that can come out into all of the rest of your organizational material. So that comes into what your corporate identity is going to look like. That comes into making sure that you have a standard manual on how everybody across the organization uses your brand, so that every time somebody creates a document, anytime somebody buys a mug, anytime somebody gets dressed in the morning, whatever it is, they go back to this idea of this is what I'm going to do to remind myself of how I connect to the emotions that we've created. This actually makes sense. So for example, when we're in web design, we can use a template that we just find off the internet and just use that, but then it's going to fail the logo test. It's not going to feel like the company, like the organization is. So that's what ends up happening is you end up spending a lot more money, but you have to customize to build the website back to the brand, as opposed to just using whatever you can find so it makes sense. So you can often find a template that will look similar, and then of course you have the problem that other people out there will end up with the same website as you, and now you've not just failed the logo test, but there could be 5 or 10 or 15 websites with this same aesthetic. This also comes down to how the brand, in terms of how people approach us on things like addresses. So for example, what are the hashtags? What are the social addresses that we use? And in fact, if you have a corporate name, you've got to start working on, sort of from a brand perspective, reminding people every day through just buying the right address, buying the right domain, cleaning up all your profiles to make sure that they're all consistent and they have the same aesthetics and they have the same messaging and they have the same sort of thing. And it's also how we communicate using social media. So that's also part of brand. And when we talk, do we speak in the same, using the same values, using the same concepts? I use the example here, and it happens to be in here, which I love. So Troy, you were talking about Under Armour before. So when we started working with Joe Boxer many years ago, their whole thing was just about a message. It was like a super masculine, sort of message directly at your head. And we needed to say, look, this is not consistent with your values, not consistent with what you're about, which is more enthusiasm and fun and interest. And we actually helped them sort of find their voice and go, you know what, we're going to help people do something crazy. And we got them, we gave out a bunch of crazy boxers to a bunch of crazy people. And ultimately, the engagement that came out of that, the recognition of their ultimate values, what really made them different than Under Armour, which made them different than Fruit of the Loom, helped connect people. And that's obviously why, maybe not obviously, but that's why I still wear Joe Boxers to today, is because I'm connected with that idea of fun, etc. In fact, let's unpack that. So Troy, you said you liked Under Armour. What's the brand values that you connect with Under Armour?
I have to go back to me playing sports, I think, and having a layer of like underwear under my sports gear that I could always rely on. It did its job. It kind of took the sweat off my body, kept me warm. It was always easily washable. It was always reliable. It lasted a long time, and it kind of, every step of the way I went, it was always with me. So it grew with me, and kind of my dependency on my performance in sports. So to this day, my wife and I we still shop at Under Armour. Now the line's changed from, connected shoes to Bluetooth to hoodies and everything else under the sun. But yeah, that's kind of where I've always been, or where I've grown to be, actually.
Isn't that funny that you connect such positive emotions with the positive experiences that you had around underwear that you genuinely consider by buying Bluetooth devices from the same company?
I have them. I'll bring them in.
Wow, that's literally crazy. That's the power of brand right there, is the idea that I am so connected to my positive experiences that I'll actually buy something because the symbol reminds me of that positive experience. Exactly, you nailed it, exactly. And this is actually where we get into that extending brand thing. So if you go to Tree Frog today, you'll actually see that we have an interior designer at Tree Frog right now who's going through and painting walls green, removing, making things more and more and more Tree Froggy, because we believe that brand, like we live it day to day. You may notice my hair color, and making sure that everything we do is consistent in that is something that I'm all about. I'm all about brand. So I'm all about every document needs to look like that. Frogs will tell you that I'm nutty about this. If I get the most random document that I will be the only person that looks at that. And if the document does not have green titles, I will send it back, which is ridiculous. But what's funny is every once in a while, you'll see a document of ours appear, whether it be on the floor, whether it be in somebody's presentation that's not from our organization, and it's branded and it's consistent and it represents and it reminds people that Tree Frog exists, and that has been a huge help to us growing. We also have other brand items, like for example, I'm sitting on one right now, I'm just going to see it. It is a Tree Frog chair. It's a special chair that, you know, it's the top of the line chair, and it represents to me this idea that we will have this amazing office. This, you know, we're gonna look after people that work at Tree Frog, treat them with respect and dignity, etc. And thus, we are going to get a chair that is going to be health positive for them. And that's sort of really important to me. Is these sort of different pieces that come around brand. The other thing would be domain. So this is obviously an important one. We actually have treefrog.com, we have treefrog.biz, we have treefrog.cc, we have all sorts of Tree Frogs. But I love the idea that we are Canadian, fiercely, proudly Canadian, and we sort of stick to that domain. And that's something that, again, from brand, we have to go out and make sure that we help people with. In fact, this is a sort of a last hint for everybody. If there's any questions, throw them in the chat. If not, I'm going to keep going. In fact, once you have a trademark, you can use it to get things like your domain. You can use it to get things like social media accounts. So once you've sort of grown your brand, you can work with Tree Frog and we help you go and own and control those things that you otherwise don't have. So lastly, there's lots of other things. There's a couple of other ideas of what you could use for brand. One is fashion. So the airlines and restaurants often use fashion, if that's the word you would use to describe how a McDonald's employee dresses. But the idea that everyone's going to be consistent throughout the whole process. Now, if you go into your average restaurant, obviously there's no uniform. But if you go into a restaurant that's really heavy on brand, that wants to grow and wants to connect people emotionally on a regular basis, you'll see that they use the chairs, they use the way people dress, they use the menu, like everything is about consistent reminders of what that experience is like. And that is branding. And I'll use another example, which is mascots. So like taking and literally personifying something, and you got to be really careful when you pick I was going to say a sports mascot, because something wrong could happen and then your brand gets negatively associated with that. And this is interesting. So mascotting can be either creating something that, like Tony the Tiger. Does anybody even remember what Tony the Tiger represents? But but the idea of Tony the Tiger is still in your head, right? That he's this super positive, yay guy that represents sugary cornflakes, right? I think, is that what he is? And then you've got the, sports personalities that represent you because they represent your values, they represent what you're trying to achieve. I guess we're at the end of our hour, and I want to thank everybody for talking, and hopefully I've convinced you that what you drink is actually, in fact, your brand, and enjoy the rest of the week.